hit record, and Linda, you're on.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to look at the results of the latest youth asset and sidebar surveys conducted in Marquette and Alger counties. We're also going to look back at data from 20 years ago when we first surveyed local youth and compare how they were doing then and how today's youth are faring. And we're going to try to do this in a half hour. So there's a lot of information to cover, and I'll be moving pretty quickly, but we'll give you some time at the end to ask questions. So let's get started here. Before we get into the data, I'll give you a little background to put it in context. Our vision at GLCYD is for all youth in the UP to thrive. We work toward that in basically two ways. Like the Y in our logo, there are two arms of what we do. One, we promote positive youth development. That is helping communities build a strong culture of support for youth. And two, strengthening nonprofit organizations of all types. A robust nonprofit sector is very important to the social fabric of a community and creating an environment where youth and their families can thrive. So we provide workshops, training, and information for organizations that work with young people, and then all types of nonprofits as well. Back in 1997, GLCYD, which was then the Kellogg Youth Initiative Partnerships, led an effort to collect data that would give us a baseline of how the young people in the two county areas were doing in regards to their healthy development. The idea was to create a picture that would show where the youth were doing well and where they needed extra support. Many of our now well-established local youth-serving organizations, such as the UP Children's Museum and Alger Parks and Rec, were relatively new at that time and already using the 40 developmental assets model of positive youth development, which builds on the strengths of young people. And the picture that we were hoping to create would help those organizations better understand where to focus their efforts. So to create the picture, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders were surveyed with the Profiles of Student Life, Attitudes and Behaviors survey from Search Institute. And that survey measures the level of 40 developmental assets in our young people. So what are these 40 developmental assets? Probably some of you on the webinar are familiar with them, but some may not be, so we'll give a little background on that. The 40 developmental assets make up a common sense framework for building on the strengths of young people. It's based on very extensive research from Search Institute that shows the more of these assets kids have, the less they take part in risky behaviors such as alcohol and drug abuse, and the more likely they are to grow up healthy, competent, and caring. It's really the basis of GLCYD's work with young people and the organizations that serve them. The assets themselves are relationships, opportunities, experiences, and characteristics that help kids thrive. In other words, they're building blocks of healthy development. All kids need assets regardless of gender, race, income, or other differences. And again, extensive research shows that the more assets kids have, the better they do. A few principles of asset building. The strength of the asset framework comes from the fact that the assets can be built or developed in young people. And that's what GLCYD's community mobilization work is based on. Asset building is really about building relationships with kids And that is something that everyone has the capacity to do. Marquette and Alger Counties have been using the common language of positive youth development, that is building on the strengths of youth, for decades. And I am very proud of our community that they have embraced that idea and really built a culture of valuing and supporting youth. It really does take a village with everyone playing a role. It's important that youth hear consistent and repeated messages about what is important and expected of them in the community, and they need to hear these messages beginning at birth and going right into adulthood. Asset building is very much a common sense framework. Most healthy, well-adjusted adults build assets in young people in their lives without even knowing it. But the key to making a difference, a significant difference, especially for a whole community, comes with putting some intentionality behind the efforts. And that's what's happened with individuals and organizations in the Marquette Alger community. And we've seen some significant differences and increases, benefits of this, and the data that we're going to look at will bear that out. Just a few more words about the asset framework before we look at the data. There are two types of assets, external and internal assets. External assets are relationships and opportunities that young people experience in their families, schools, communities, etc. They fall into four categories of support, empowerment, boundaries and expectations, and constructive use of time. So these external assets, one way of thinking about it is that these assets are more provided by the community, by families, by youth serving organizations, by the faith community, law enforcement, the business community, everyone. And then internal assets are competencies and values that youth develop within themselves to guide their behaviors and choices. They fall into the categories of commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. But all of these assets, both external and internal, can be developed and strengthened in youth, and we can all play a role in that. So now to the surveys. The Profiles of Student Life Attitudes and Behaviors survey was developed by Search Institute. GLCYD has been administering the survey to 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in Marquette and Alger counties every 2 years since 1997. The survey measures the level of 40 assets in a community's youth, and we most recently did the survey at the end of last October and the beginning of November. The surveys are done online and it's all anonymous. We don't see how individual students respond. Rather, the results that we see and that I'll be presenting today really show how the kids do as a whole, as a group. So we can also see the results broken down by gender as well as by grade, again, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. And schools get their own set of data for their specific school population. But the information that we'll be looking at today is all of the schools combined. The survey also measures deficit behaviors, substance use behaviors, risk-taking behaviors, and thriving indicators. And we'll see as the number of assets change, either increase or decrease, we'll also see corresponding increases and decreases in both deficit behaviors and thriving behaviors. So why do we collect the data? Well, it gives us a very good picture of how our youth are doing. The community can see where youth are doing well and where they may need some extra support, and then hopefully take action around that. GLCYD uses the data for community mobilization. We want organizations to really take asset building to heart, and many of you on the line, I'm sure, have. Schools use the data for school improvement, and organizations can use the data for things like program planning and in grant proposals. So let's get into the data. The survey showed that 50% of the surveyed youth, that is 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in Marquette and Alger counties, have more than half of the assets. So the gray area represents the youth with 21 to 30 assets, and the gold slice of the pie there represents the kids with 31 to 40 assets. Ideally, all kids would have 31 to 40. However, that probably isn't a real likely goal. A more realistic goal for a community would be for all of the kids to have at least half of the assets. And we have been moving in that direction. In 1997, only 34% had more than half of the assets. And even as late as 2014, only 48% had more than half of the assets. So, you know, we've made some significant gains there. And then you'll also see that 37% of the kids have 11 to 20, and that blue slice of the pie represents 10% of our young people that have 10 or fewer assets. And those would be kids that we would consider high risk, and that we might want to pay some very close attention to. Just to give you a little comparison, from 1997, when we first did the survey, at that time, 21% of our kids had 0 to 10 assets. 45% had 11 to 20, 27% had 21 to 30, and then 7% had 31 to 40. So, you know, when you compare those numbers, we're doing significantly better than back in 1997, 20 years ago. This slide illustrates how assets promote thriving behaviors. And these percentages that you see are from our local kids. Basically, the more assets our kids have, the more they exhibit thriving behaviors. So look at that, the left side of the graph there. The behavior of helping others. About 52% of the youth with 10 or fewer assets exhibit that thriving behavior of helping others. About 71% of youth with 11 to 20 assets do. Then it jumps up to about 83% with kids with 21 to 30 assets. Excuse me, and to 90% for kids with 31 to 40 assets, which is represented by the gold bar. Excuse me. And you can see that same pattern with other thriving behaviors of valuing diversity, maintaining good health, and delaying gratification. Also, the assets have the power to protect against risk-taking behaviors. So kids with more assets are less prone to risk-taking and problem behaviors like depression, suicide, violence, alcohol use, and school problems such as low grades and truancy. So here you see that our kids with 0 to 10 assets, represented by the blue bar, have a much higher rate of each of these problem behaviors than the kids with a higher number of assets. So the fact that the assets protect against problem behaviors and promote thriving behaviors is ultimately why we mobilize communities around building assets. So in 1997, our young people had an average of 17.4 of the assets. Today it's up to 21. With the exception of a couple of slight dips over the years, there's been a gradual increase. And I think this speaks to a growing culture in Marquette and Alger counties of supporting our kids. Excuse me. And this slide and the next one are probably the most important in this webinar. And that's because as the assets have gone up over that 20-year time period, we've also seen that high risk behaviors such as substance use, shown in this graph, have gone down significantly. So for instance, the rate of drinking in the last 30 days, that blue line, went from around 52% in 1997 to 20% last fall. Tobacco use, represented by the yellow line, went from 30% in 1997 to about 8% last fall. So this is exactly what back in 1997 we were hoping to see. So kudos to our community. You know, it's been working. But of course, this doesn't mean that our work is done. The work of asset building in all our efforts with our youth need to be sustained, or we'll see those lines going right back up. So there's no rest for us here, but we're on the right track. Wanted to show you some of the most common assets, the ones that more of our kids have. And these are the top ones. So 81% of our students that were surveyed have that asset of integrity. 80% have the asset of responsibility. And you can see the numbers there. 79% have honesty, 79% achievement motivation, 77% of the kids have that asset of family support, and 77% have positive peer influence. A couple of things about this. This is the first time in Marquette and Alger counties that we've ever hit the 80% mark on any of the assets. So that's kind of a cool thing that we have two that have reached 80. Another interesting thing to note is that 4 of the 6 most common assets are internal assets. Again, those are the assets that really develop within a young person and that the young person has the most ability to impact in themselves. And then we look at the least common assets. So these are the ones that the least number of our kids have. And a couple of things to mention here. Reading for pleasure is at an all-time low. That is one that has bounced around in the mid to high 20s since 1997. And creative activities has been at the bottom of the barrel every survey year since 1997. So those are low. Also notice that 6 of the 7 least common assets are external assets, and those are the ones that are provided for the most part by the community, by organizations, by schools, by families, but generally speaking by the community. then we can look at some of the assets that have changed the most over the 20 years. So like when we looked at that, the slide that showed an average of 17.4%, or excuse me, 17.4 of the assets back in 1997, going to 21 might not seem like a big change, but when you look at some of the individual assets, you can see some really significant gains and a couple of drops too. So 8 have improved by 20% or more, which is very significant. A significant change would be anything 5% or more. So equality and social justice, caring, high expectations, bonding to school, those are really huge gains. And then 2 that have dropped significantly, safety, that has gone down 11 percentage points, and religious community down 14 points, percentage points. Also school engagement, but that one, there's a little kind of a caveat there that the questions changed. It was like a 4-part question and 2 of the parts changed slightly this past survey year. So I think that would account for some of the change there. As I mentioned earlier, the survey measures risk-taking behaviors as well as the assets, and this is one of those behaviors that our community has been particularly concerned about. As you can see, the depression, attempted suicide rates, it's relatively high when you think that 22% of our kids felt sad or depressed most or all of the time in the last month. 17% had attempted suicide 1 or more times, and 28% frequently depressed and or have attempted suicide. And you can see it's much higher for females than males, and a little bit higher in the higher grades. We have some community coalitions and some very concerted and strong efforts around suicide prevention in our 2 counties right now. And I would say if you'd like to become involved, call either the Marquette or Alger County health departments, and they can hook you up. They can connect you with a coalition or group that's doing some efforts around this area. We also do a sidebar survey along with the profiles of student life. We ask questions that folks in the community have wanted some additional information on. So the questions are in 4 categories around career preparation, substance use and perceptions, internet use and safety, and health and nutrition. We'll look at a few of those items. Internet use, 59% of our students are spending 3 or more hours online each day. Probably not a big surprise, but something that you know, we can quantify here, and it's something that we need to keep an eye on. That is up from 39% in 2012 and up even farther from 2010 at 24%. 94% of our students are using some social networking sites, whether it's, you know, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, what have you. Almost all of them are using social networking. Cyberbullying is a topic that's been an area of concern both nationally and locally. So we asked in the past year, have you seen a post or received a message online or by text messaging from a peer that was meant to threaten, embarrass, or harass you? 24% answered yes. 17% of males answered yes. 30% of females, so much higher for girls than boys. and it's up from 24% in 2014 for girls. We asked a new question this year around sexting that has been a topic that has been of concern. 28% said that they have either sent or received messages they would consider sexting. 10% said they don't know what it is. And you can see the breakdown there by grade of how they responded. We also asked a couple new questions around mental health. One of them was if you ever thought talking to a counselor or mental health professional would be helpful, but you didn't, what was the reason? 20% said they didn't know who to talk to. 11% said it cost too much money. 14% didn't want their parents to know. 11% didn't want their friends to know. 13% didn't have enough time. The majority had said they had never thought about seeing anyone. And another new question on mental health, kind of, well, if a friend told you they were meeting with a counselor every week for help, how would you feel? So it kind of gets to asking about this, a stigma, is getting to whether there's a stigma around mental health that kids are feeling. 13% said they would be inspired to do the same. 81% said they would be proud of them for finding the help they needed. So that's very encouraging. Only 4% said they were weak or not being able to take care of their own problems. Only 2% said they wouldn't want to associate with them anymore, and 13% were other. Oh, time flies when you're having fun. So the next steps with the data, there is more data, and the next steps for us, for GLCYD, is to get the word out to as many people in the community as we can. So we are available to do community presentations if you have or are part of a group or an organization. You know, just ask. We will be happy to come out and present the data. We can do it in more depth if you'd like. So we are available for that. Also, we have our annual, or biannual, I should say, asset report, which is online right now. So if you go to GLCYD, you can see that report, and it has some of the information that we've talked about here today, but also much more. And then we're also going to be doing 2 asset building webinars in August, and the dates for those are August 9th and 29th at 10 o'clock in the morning, just like this one. And if there are particular topics you'd like to see around asset building and or positive youth development, please let me know so we can include those in those webinars, but I hope you'll join us for those as well. One other thing that we do each year following the survey is that we have youth asset summits in both Marquette and Alger counties, when we bring teams of kids from each of the middle school and high schools together. We go over the results of the survey with them, because what we had found was that the kids did the survey and then they didn't really hear anything more about it. And we know that kids have the ability to build assets in themselves and in their peers. So at the youth summits, we bring the kids together, they go through the results of the survey, and they pick out some areas, some assets where they feel they can have the most impact, and where they feel that efforts really need to be focused. And then we give them a little bit of seed money to plan and implement a project back in their respective schools and communities, to do a project to build assets in their peers. And it's always a good time. If any of you are school personnel, please make sure that you get a team to the youth summit, because it's a cool thing, and the kids come up with really wonderful ideas that they take back to their schools and communities. So I'd like to leave you here with a bit of a challenge, the asset building challenge, to think about where you as an individual could have an impact within the assets, and where your organization or any group that you're associated with might have the greatest impact. And again, if you go to glcyd.org, you can see that community report, which has a list of all of the 40 assets and the percentage of our kids that have that asset. So you can see some of them, again, like those least common assets that showed up, and think about, how could you help change that? How could your organization change that? And again, let us know, and we are happy to present the data, as well as help you come up with ways that you can build assets in young people. And I know we've gone over time, but want to have some time for questions. So if you have any questions right now, please type those in. Just as long as you want to say. So if you have any questions, now would be the time. Amy, do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Linda. We don't have any questions right now that I see. However, if you want, you can also raise your hand and I can try to unmute you, so you can ask your question directly if you prefer to do that instead of typing it into the chat box. We'll give you a few moments to think about that and to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And Linda, you may want to mention the event coming up in partnership with the Children's Museum.
Oh yeah, we have an event coming up. It's in celebration of our 20 years of asset building in Marquette County and Alger County, and also in celebration of the UP Children's Museum's 20th birthday. So the event is on July 26th from 5:30 to 7:30, and it's a reunion of friends of the museum and of GLCYD. So, you're welcome to join us. There will be a family fish fry, so you can get this awesome fish that I've heard people rave about, fish and fries and coleslaw, and I think it's $10 for adults, $5 for kids. But then we'll also have some other free treats and lots of activities, and it should be a really good time.
Excellent. We did have a question that says, can we get a copy of the full report emailed to us? Absolutely. We'll make sure that you get that, as well as a link.
Oh, Amy, you're breaking up there. Could you say that again?
That we will make sure you all get electronic copies of the reports and links to this recording if you'd like.
Sure.
Are there any other questions? Again, thank you for attending. Linda, thank you for your presentation. And please feel free to contact us at any time with any questions or or comments or anything that we could do for you. And thanks for all your work.
So thanks for joining us today.
Bye-bye.
Okay, signing off. Bye.